Let's talk about the Siege of Tobruk. But we're not just going to look at it as another battle. No, this is really a psychological puzzle. It's the story of what happens when the most disciplined, by-the-book army in the world runs into an enemy that they just cannot figure out. An enemy that seemed to break all the rules of war. Okay, so picture this. It's late 1941. You've got 14,000 Australian soldiers completely trapped inside a fortress. They are surrounded by Erwin Rommel's Afrika Korps, this seemingly unstoppable force. By all logic, they should just surrender, right? But that's not what happens. Instead, something really strange starts happening out there in the dark. You see, the German command was completely baffled. Their men, these are seasoned veterans we're talking about, they were just disappearing from their forward posts. No firefight, no big attack. They were just gone, swallowed up by the stillness of the night. This wasn't warfare as they knew it. It felt like something else, something almost supernatural.
And the few soldiers who did survive these encounters, well, they'd get back to their lines in a state of absolute shock. And they weren't talking about fighting other soldiers. The stories they told were of ghost-like figures just materializing out of the desert floor. They described silent predators that struck with unbelievable speed and then just melted back into the darkness.
But here is the incredible twist in this whole story. These terrifying phantoms in the desert? They weren't some secret elite fighting force. In fact, pretty much everyone, and I mean everyone, including their own allies, thought they were a complete joke.
I mean, just look at these assessments. The British High Command called them undisciplined colonials, even a rabble in uniforms. German intelligence, they just dismissed them as poorly trained. Even the great Rommel himself figured they'd break easily. The consensus was clear. These were amateur soldiers with no real military tradition.
And that's because every single one of those experts missed the entire point. The Australians' background, it wasn't a weakness, it was their most devastating weapon. The answer to this whole mystery wasn't in some military manual. No, it was in the land they all came from.
You have to understand, so many of these men had grown up in the Australian outback. We're talking about one of the most unforgiving environments on the planet. It teaches you how to be tough, how to be patient, and how to be incredibly resourceful. They knew how to move without a sound, how to use darkness as a cloak, how to survive where other people just couldn't. So, for them, the North African desert, it wasn't scary. To them, it felt like home.
This slide, this really gets to the heart of it. On one side, you've got your conventional soldier. He fights by the book, he relies on overwhelming firepower, and frankly, he fears the night. And on the other side, you've got these Australian bushmen. They fought by instinct, they relied on pure stealth, and they didn't fear the night. They owned it. It was this fundamental clash of mindsets that the Germans just were not prepared for.
So the Australian commanders, especially General Leslie Morshed, had this brilliant moment of insight. He realized instead of trying to force these guys into a conventional mold, why not just weaponize their natural skills? They stopped trying to make hunters fight like soldiers, and they just let the hunters hunt.
And out of this, they developed a brand new tactic. They called it the silent raid, and it was the complete opposite of conventional war. Forget huge artillery bombardments. This was about small teams of men, moving like ghosts in the dark, armed with little more than knives and the absolute terror they could create.
And their methods were just terrifyingly precise. We're talking about crawling for hours on end to get within just 20 or 30 meters of a German post. They'd always strike in the dead of night, between 2 and 4 a.m., when alertness is at its absolute lowest. They used silent weapons, knives, bayonets. The whole attack was over in seconds. And then, poof, they'd just vanish.
So what was the actual impact of all this? Did it work? Oh yeah, it worked so well that for Erwin Rommel it became a complete strategic nightmare. The results of these silent raids were, well, they were absolutely staggering.
Just look at the hard data here. The numbers are just astonishing. Against regular British troops, a German forward post had about a 12% chance of monthly casualties. Okay, not great. But against the Australians, that number explodes to over 70%. Think about that for a second. That means 7 out of every 10 men stationed on that line became a casualty. It's unbelievable.
So let's just put that in the simplest terms. This wasn't some minor advantage. This completely changed how lethal the battlefield was. For an ordinary German soldier on the front line, facing an Australian was 6 times more deadly than facing anyone else. 6 times.
And this quote from a captured German officer, it just says it all. He said, "My men call the Australians devils," not as an insult, as a description. He explained that when you fought the British, it felt like a proper war, but the Australians, they didn't fight like that. It was something else entirely, something primal and terrifying.
This forced Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, to do something basically unthinkable. He ordered his entire line to pull back several kilometers away from the Australians. He gave up valuable ground without even having a major battle, just because he couldn't protect his men at night. It was completely backwards. The besieged were acting like the attackers, and the attackers were in retreat.
And this right here, this is the proof of the total psychological victory. Rommel himself wrote this in his personal diary. He said he couldn't predict them because they didn't follow the rules. Every other army he fought was predictable. But the Australians, they fought by instinct. The Desert Fox had been completely and utterly outfoxed.
And this story, it doesn't just end in the dust of North Africa. The lessons that were learned at Tobruk would actually go on to reshape the very nature of modern combat.
Seriously, you can draw a direct line from these gritty, improvised raids to the elite special forces we have all over the world today. What started as hunters just using their wits to survive became the foundation for commando tactics, for what we now call asymmetric warfare. And it's basically core doctrine for units like the Navy SEALs and the SAS.
And what about that famous nickname, the Rats of Tobruk? Well, it was actually supposed to be an insult. German propaganda started calling them that, trapped in their holes like rats. But the Australians, they heard it, they loved it, and they immediately took it on as a badge of honor. I mean, after all, everyone knows how dangerous a cornered rat can be.
So I think the ultimate takeaway from the whole story of Tobruk is a really powerful one. True effectiveness, whether it's in war or in life, it doesn't come from having better equipment or older, fancier traditions. It comes from adaptation. It comes from looking at a new problem and figuring out how to use the skills you already have in a new and completely unexpected way.
Which really just leaves us with one final question to think about. What's more powerful? Is it the kind of rigid discipline that's forged by centuries of military tradition? Or is it the practical, hard-won discipline that you learn from just surviving in the toughest places on Earth? I think the story of the Rats of Tobruk gives a pretty clear answer to that one.